Okay then, hi guys. Today I'm going to talk about how to pass language paper one. So obviously this is for AQA, and I'm going to be, thinking about how in these 5 questions, how can you up your marks and how can you better understand the questions. I always think that when I started teaching the 2 language papers when I was trained to be a teacher, until I fully understood what each question entailed and was able to say, right, paper one, question three structure. I felt like I didn't have, as good of a grasp on it until I felt like I'd mastered that. So I think that this video should really help you in terms of being able to understand what each question requires you to do, and then how to go about doing that and developing your confidence and understanding the paper really, and what we're looking for as markers. Okay then. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a resource in the description that's going to have some of the knowledge organisers that you might see on this video. So you're going to have that to take away. But just start off with then. So we're going to be doing the walk through the paper. Paper one is 1 extract, very easy to remember. One extract. Paper two, 2 extracts. Okay. Usually the extracts are they're quite usually quite boring, they're quite dry, but there's always stuff to have a look at. They would never pick an extract where there isn't some interesting language devices, some interesting patterns in the text. So when you start, make sure you take I would say 5 to 10 minutes reading the paper. I know some of you read quicker than others, but really do take some time to go and read through the extract. I often say personally, I used to like reading the paper quickly first, so that I've got some indication of the things I'm looking for. If I know that I'm looking at how does the writer describe the sea in question 2, for example, then I know that I need to try and kind of spot those things as I'm reading it. But that's just my personal opinion. Some of you might want to just go in and read the extract first, which I know a lot of you will do. Okay then, so question 1, please don't spend more than 5 minutes on this. This is a gift of the question. It's 4 marks. It's list 4 things. Okay, I often say that you might want to start with the same centre starter in each one. You just take that centre starter from the question. So if the question says, describe the weather, for example, tell me 4 things about, not describe the weather, tell me 4 things about the weather in the extract. You can just start each one with the weather is, the weather is, the weather is. But don't tell me about language devices. Tell me exactly what the question asks. And if I were you, I'd highlight the answers in the extract as you go along. Okay. So this is what it's going to look like. As we go through, you are going to see some screenshots from the from paper, so you can kind of have a look and familiarise yourself. If you sat there having a go at a paper now as we go through this, that's a really good idea. But this is taken from a real AQA paper. Okay, so 4 questions, so it's 4 marks. They'll give you the specific lines to look at. Please only look at those lines. And it's a very easy question. Don't jump up on it. I've had some really capable candidates only get 2 out of 4 marks simply because they didn't read the question properly. Okay, so make sure that you do so, please, and don't go writing like 2 pages. You literally just have to write, if we list 4 things about Alice and her surroundings, Alice's surroundings are, just steal it from the question. Okay, and you don't have to use exact quotes, but you can use quotes if you want, if it helps you, kind of break down the question. If in terms of like, if you feel it's difficult without using quotes, you can if you want to. But again, it's 4 marks. Like, don't spend more than 5 minutes. It's an important point saying the general rule is roughly a mark a minute. So, if it's an 8-mark question like question 2 is, 8 to 10 minutes. Okay. So then, in this one, we're going to look at a small extract of the source that's indicated to you in the question. You must look at language devices. We're going to talk about this later on. So you haven't looked at language devices in question 1, but you do in question 2. The question is going to advise you to look at words, phrases, language features, techniques, sentence forms. You don't have to cover all of them, but I know some students like to think, well, in the first paragraph we're going to look at a word or a phrase, the second paragraph we'll look at language feature or technique, and then the third we'll look at sentence forms. I don't think you have to do 3 full paragraphs for this. Is 8 marks. I would just say focus on doing 2 solid paragraphs, and trying to vary up what you're looking at. A sentence form, it can be something as simple as talk about a simple sentence. You talk about a short sentence and the impact on the reader. But the easiest way to succeed in this question is to talk about individual words and how they help answer the question. So the question is looking at how does the sea described. You're going to look at individual words that tell me exactly how the sea is described. 1 year loads of students looked at majestically, looking at the sea, and loads of them were like the verb majestically, and it's an adverb. So if in doubt, just put the word majestically. Has connotations of royalty, for example, because we associate the word majestic with someone who's potentially a king, or someone who's very has kind of like a regal air to them, for example. Okay, because if you think majestic, if you think about the word root of it, is similar to majesty, which is obviously what we would call someone who is the king or the queen. Okay, then, so remember, you can look at word classes, sentence functions, general language techniques, and some persuasive language techniques as well if it's relevant. Please use fit, so how does it make the reader feel, imagine, think. However, if you're looking at those higher marks, some of you that are aiming for 7, 8s, and 9s, don't be really prescriptive and stick to like point, evidence, technique, analyze, link. Just try to be more free flowing, try and look at opposing viewpoints, the however, if you're struggling with that, look at my perceptive language analysis video, because I go through all about how to be perceptive in that, and just really trying and think outside of the box. My biggest tip for this question is don't look at the quotes that are really obvious. Try and look at the quotes that you think most of the other people in the room won't be looking at, because I think that's the easiest way of getting to the top band on this question, as well as many other questions that are similar to this. And then you can just have a conclusion sentence. There's no need to have an introduction. There's no real need to have a conclusion, really. If you're struggling for time, just focus on 2 in-depth petal or paragraphs, whatever you do. So, for example, it'll look like this. Look at lines 5 to 11 of the source. The paper I looked at couldn't be reproduced for copyright restrictions, which blew my mind. So how does the writer use language here to describe the mountain area? Which means you're looking at how does the writer construct this description of the mountain area. We're looking at its construction, which means we're looking at the words, because the words are the building blocks that construct this description. That means you've got to pull that down and look at those individual words, look at those phrases, look at those techniques. Okay, try and find patterns in the text. Again, I talk about that a lot in my perceptive language video. Okay, then now let's move on to arguably I think my favourite question in paper 1, which is the structure question. A lot of students really struggle with this question. It's only 8 marks because they can't really seem to get in the mindset of, right, I've just looked at language, I've looked at language techniques, now I've got to look at structure, and I'm not thinking about language anymore, I'm thinking about structural techniques. In some other examples, like any Excel, they combine language and structure questions, which in a way is easier, but in some ways it's harder, because at least with AQA you are able to kind of say, I'm not looking at structure in question 2, I'm looking at question 3. So in AQA they do distinguish the two things. Basically, what structure is, it's the sequence of events, the order in which things happen in the text and why that makes it interesting, as well as structural techniques like delay decoding. So, where information is told to us later in the text, withheld information when we never find out certain information. And I'll put together a structure video, because it is something that a lot of students struggle with, and actually it's a gift of a question, really. You're literally just looking at what happens at the beginning, what happens at the middle, and what happens at the end. Okay, so I would make sure that you focus on using that beginning, middle, end, and so you have 3 paragraphs for this. They haven't got to be extremely long. You don't even have to use quotes for this question, guys. And then use focus, shift, zoom. So what's our attention focus at the beginning? What's it shifted to in the middle? And what does it zoom in on at the end? And we're basically moving through the text almost as though we're like a GoPro camera, and we're kind of like moving through it and seeing what is my attention focus on at each point in the text, almost like we're a camera. At the beginning, am I looking at some birds, and then I move to looking inside of someone's bedroom, and then we go back to the birds. But why do we do that? Why is it that important, that cyclical structure there? So this question is about understanding our journey through the text. Where do we go? Why do we go there? Do we go from room to room? Do we shift to the sky? Why? Is the writer trying to alleviate the tension? Is the writer trying to increase the tension? This question is all about how tense do we feel at each point, and how does that interest us as a reader, okay? And you're not to look at language devices while you're doing this, guys. It's all about structure. Things like internal thought, like what's the character thinking this time? External action, is the character now suddenly kind of jumping out of their seat? Why does that interest us? Does it shock us? Does it surprise us? Does it keep us as readers on the edge of our seat? Okay, how does it make the reader feel, imagine, think? But if you're struggling, and if you're someone that really does not get this question, you're literally just going to tell me what happens at the beginning, what do we focus on at the beginning, what happens in the middle, what do our attention shift to in the middle, and what happens at the end. And you will be able to get at least a few marks in this question, guys. Don't just ignore it because you might find it more difficult. Once you get your head around structure, actually, it's one of the nicest questions because, it's allowing you to kind of show off what you've gone and learned about structure, and you can then apply that in literature when you're looking at structural techniques in an extract, for example, and all of a sudden you have so many more things to talk about. So I'm a big fan of this question because I think it really kind of expands your view on how to analyze. So it looks like this. You think about the whole source. How is it? And it's always worded like this, guys. How is the writer structure the text to interest you as a reader? Okay, please don't write it makes me want to read on. You're more talking about, like in more of a sensitive way. So, for example, if I'm reading I was reading an extract from the Hunger Games, and in that extract, Katniss, if you've never watched or read the Hunger Games, please go do so. Katniss is waiting to go and fight all the other tributes. And we're waiting with her. We're reading it with, as we're reading it, it's happening in the present tense. And we want her to go out and fight these tributes. We want to see what happens, but the writer delays it. Suzanne Collins takes us on a diversion where she starts talking about Katniss's past, and it's frustrating for us as readers because we just wanted to get to the action. We want to know if Katniss going to live or die. She's going to kill someone, and so readers sometimes kind of slow the pace down to keep us kind of hooked and wanting to read on. But we want to say that without explicitly saying it makes me want to read on. We want to say, more of a sensitive way. We want to talk about diversions, talk about the attention, talk about, keeping the reader on the edge of their seat. Okay, so this takes practice, this question does, but just focus on begin, middle, and end, and you'll be fine. Okay then, so this question again, this is another one that a lot of students find quite tricky, the reader said question. For this one, don't spend more than 20 minutes on it. It's 20 marks. You're just looking at a small extract of the source, or in some ways it's easier than question 3 because you're not looking at the whole source. And actually, they're giving you the reader's opinion straight away in the title of the question because you can literally just agree with what they've said. Now, some of the candidates some of the students that are looking for the higher grade will want to disagree with, or at least provide a counter argument to what the reader said in the question, because that will again get you higher to those kind of perceptive analysis marks. It is usually much easier to agree, however, though, guys. It's vital that you highlight the part of the question that states evaluate how the writer. Whenever you're asked how the writer does something, you must look at language techniques. Okay, if the word how is there, we want to know as markers, how is that being constructed in the text? It's being constructed through this language technique. It's being constructed through this word which has this connotations. It connotes a sense of warmth that makes me think this. So the whole kind of the core of literature is just understanding why are the writers doing that, and how do they create this fantastic effect? How do they want me to how are they drawing me in as a reader? How are they making me feel tense, and making me feel like I care for these characters that literally are just made from words on a page. Okay. If I was you, I'd write an introduction and try and define the buzzword in the question. The buzzword is the word that changes, in each question. So, for example, if it's asking you about like your opinion on the character Sister Brendan because she came up in one of the papers, then you need to make sure you highlight that you highlight the word Sister Brendan, or you highlight our opinions on Sister Brendan as readers, for example. Okay, so your introduction only needs between 2 to 3 sentences long. If you're struggling for time, guys, just get straight into it. But it's good to do a little introduction for this one because I need to know your opinion on the statement. And then I've said potentially 4 petals. I think I've been a little petals in paragraphs, been a little bit ambitious there. Focus on 3 in-depth paragraphs, and then just a conclusion of 2 sentences that mirrors your introduction. Okay, but it's always better for quality rather than quantity. So if you're struggling for time, focus on doing in-depth. Less in-depth paragraphs rather than lots of scatty little ones. You might want to dedicate a whole paragraph considering the counter argument, but you must show that you go back to your original opinion for a reason. You only ever provide a counter argument if you're then able to dismantle it and show, you know, why you were right in the first place. That's really, really important, because you don't want the marker to think that you're like, oh, I think this, and then I think this, and actually I'm not quite sure. I think you kind of want to be able to present alternative opinions without sounding like you don't really know what you're talking about. Okay. So it's going to look like this. Focus your answer on the second part of the source from lines 21 to the end. A reader says, this part of the story where Alice decides to continue digging for the object is very mysterious and suggests her discovery may be life-changing. To what extent do you agree? So it's, you know, you kind of weighing up your opinions. What you can do is you can zoom in on little things and say, actually, yeah, I think it's very mysterious, but you know what, I don't think it's life-changing, because how can we know discovery is life-changing if it's, you know, left on this cliffhanger and we don't know? So that's a really intelligent thing to do, is to agree with part of it, you know, disagree with part of it, and kind of show that you're really evaluating. To evaluate is to weigh up and come to a conclusion at the end. You weigh up different evidence. So a judge or a jury would evaluate different evidence. I talk about that quite a lot in my How to Analyze Clearly video. And you can see the word evaluate on the screen. Hang on, I can just try and underline it just here. And so you want to think about how you can kind of practice doing that when you practice doing question 4s. Okay, then question 5, descriptive or narrative writing. Gift of a question. This, I've had pupils that have gone from in a grade 3 to a grade 5 literally because of their question 5 being excellent in both papers. I would say spend approximately 50 minutes, so 5 minutes planning, 40 minutes writing, 5 minutes checking. You must spend at least 5 minutes planning, guys. Please plan. The markers actually like to see you planning if it's effective. I'm going to talk about the 6-paragraph plan in a moment, but because it's really useful to get your structural marks. Basically, you get 24 marks of content and organisation and 16 marks technical accuracy. So this is the first time in the paper you're going to get SPAG marks. There's quite a lot of SPAG marks actually. The easiest way to do well in this question, I would say, is to write a description. Or if you're going to write a narrative, a story, it must have in-depth descriptive elements. Okay, you can do the prettiest writing, what I call it, like pretty writing, through a description. When I'm reading, say if I was reading my Kindle, which happens to match my jumper, I don't want to read loads and loads of description because I'm reading a full book. You are not writing a full book. You are writing, you know, kind of like the opening to a story, for example. You're writing a short piece. That means, and I once read 14 paragraphs of this, you know, of a narrative that just kind of went on and on. I had multiple characters in. I don't want to read that. I'm not here to read like Tolkien's Lord of the Rings trilogy. Like, I want to read a nice kind of short story, short description that doesn't go off on a tangent. Might have a little bit of a plot twist, but it's filled with description, because description is where you're going to get your language techniques in. It's where you're going to get your pretty words in. You know, where you're going to be able to really create that beautiful imagery for the reader, or you know, or it might be like quite scary imagery for the reader, but just try not to go off and tell a long story, because like you know, so many other students will do that, and we want to read pretty language more than we want to read like a massive long tale that goes off on one. Please don't write more than 6 paragraphs as well, because like we would rather see quality than quantity. Okay, the most important things to remember in this question is paragraphs. You will lose loads of marks for structure if you can't do paragraphs. Vary your vocabulary. So I would say the easiest way to do that is through colour imagery. You know, talk about the cerulean blues, talk about the lapis blue ocean. Very easy to learn. I mean, I used to try and learn maybe like 5 to 10 colour words, and then I'd just try and use those in any creative writing piece I was doing. I would also practice writing some similes about, you know, similes, metaphors about the sky, the ground, a person, so that you can use those in anyone that comes up, because there's always going to be the sky, there's always going to be the ground, and most of the time there's going to be a character. You can practice writing about a character you're really comfortable with as well if you like. You might want to practice, you know, if there's a celebrity or maybe a family member and you just don't include their name, but you use what they look like and you describe them in your, because you know them really well, or, you know, you've practiced writing about them, and then you can just place that character into any story then. Be tactical about it. Vary punctuation. So you might want to draw a punctuation face where you draw a face and you have like semicolons and question marks and stuff, and then you cross them up as you go along. It's a bit kind of a long way around doing it, but the way I would encourage you to think is try and vary, maybe 3 different punctuation marks in each paragraph. So it can be like comma, full stop, exclamation mark. Speech marks is one I always notice when I'm marking. I'm like, oh, they've used speech marks. But don't use more than I would say don't use more than like 4 lines of dialogue. It's not necessary. It just sounds like a radio play if you use too much dialogue. And frequently include a vast range of language devices. Give us lots to mark, okay? When I'm marking, at the beginning, I want to see straight away. I quite like to see start in the middle of the action, maybe starting with a one word sentence. Starting off with lots and lots of descriptive language. Another thing that's really important is to include a variety of short and long sentences. So you might want to, for example, have, when you're starting off, like I was saying, having some short sentences. Something that's really interesting to have a look at is if you Google Gary Provost's description of how your language should be like music, and he talks about how we have short sentences, then we have long sentences, when the reader's rested, and then we try and make your words sound like music. We don't have a series of 5-word sentences. Gary Provost, his is really good. I always use it when I'm teaching about how to write. And you want to try and make the reader feel like they're enjoying reading and they're not kind of struggling through these monotonous sentences. And don't focus on one thing throughout. I had one pupil who and it was such an easy kind of mistake to make. There was an image of someone's face and they literally spent 6 paragraphs writing about the person's face. Don't do that. Like, you start with the face and then move to something else. Shift to the sky, to internal thoughts. What are they thinking? To sounds in the distance. This will increase your structural marks. I would just say one thing. It is actually easy to do a third person narrative. So describing things rather than saying I, because it's so much easier to describe when you're looking at it from a third person narrative. However, I know a lot of people like to write in first person. It's completely up to you. I'm just saying third person is easier, but it doesn't affect your marks either way. Use what you've learned about language and structure to help you with this question. So this paper's been built up to this. You've done a question on language, you've done a question on structure. This should help you then when it comes to question 5, when it's assessing your ability to use these language and structural devices in crafting almost kind of an extract of your own. End with a 1-sentence paragraph that's a flash forward or flash back in time. If you struggle with doing the flash forward or flash back at the end, you can do it at other points within your narrative, but make sure you've got that 1-sentence paragraph there, okay? Because that's going to get structural marks. Such an easy way to get structural marks is by changing the time, including 1-sentence paragraph. Okay, that was so much information. So I'm just going to show you a couple of checklists that you might want to screenshot, for example. So, this is what it looks like. You're going to have something like write a story set in a mountainous area as suggested by this picture, or write a story with the title Discovery. And you are actually allowed to combine both of them. So if you want to write about discovery, but you also want to use the image, that's fine. AQA don't mind that. So if you might want to pause and screenshot this and kind of like maybe you print it off if you want. This is the 6-paragraph plan. You can obviously, absolutely, you can try to follow this. I think it's difficult to remember it in the exam. So if I was you, I would always try and think, right, I need to try and do this at some point, this at some point. Start in the middle of the action. Try and describe the character at the start, then try and do the setting. You zooming in on action, introducing a problem, zooming away, looking at something else, resolving the problem. But you can intertwine these, but just don't start off with describing the setting, and try and start off in the middle of the action, because these are things that are going to get the structural marks. And then try and change the time at some point, but please don't say 4 years later, like, and make it sound really cliche. You can do it in a way that isn't so forced. You might say, trying to think of an example. Say if you've written something about a ghost, only do that if you're going to be able to do it in a non-cliche way. and you say if you're talking about a ghost or something, you might say, you know, he roams the halls still all these years later. Something a little bit more kind of, and that was probably not the best example, but something a little bit less cliche than like 4 years later. I've seen some people actually write it as a title, like a subtitle for their conclusion, for their final paragraph. Please don't do that either. Like, this isn't an article. We don't need subtitles. Okay, so again, here's so it's going to go through green, red, black. So green being the easiest, red being middle, black being hardest. So basically, if you want, you can pause this and you can steal it. You know, if you're trying to practice writing, these center starters are based on an image of bonfire night, I think, with some fireworks. So if you're practicing, you might want to use these success checklists. It might be quite useful for you. Red, so you can, you know, try and aim to do that. I mean, this is quite a forced way of doing it as a checklist, but if it helps you, it helps you. And I find a lot of students do find success checklists quite useful, because I know that mentally I would often be kind of ticking off. I quite enjoy naturally writing, but in my mind I'm mentally ticking off, right, have I done that, have I done that, have I done that? And it just makes it a lot easier if you've got a checklist. And then black being the most advanced checklist there. Okay, and then just as a quick overview. Question 1, don't look at language devices. Question 2, you must look at language devices. Question 3, don't look at language devices because you're looking at structural devices. Question 4, you must look at language devices. Question 5, you must include language and structural devices in your creative writing. Again, this might be quite useful for you to screenshot, write down in your notes, maybe make some flashcards on it. I don't know, whatever you want to do. And then again, if you want to, this is one of the things that's included in the paper 1 and paper 2 knowledge organizer resource that's in the description. So feel free. These are best off printed on A3, but you don't have to. You can print them on A4 and just kind of like squint. Same with this one. So it just goes through basically everything I've talked about in this